Once upon a time, the world was divided into several parts. The earth was inhabited by dragons, humans, and other races. A demonic world where demons and monsters existed still existed, as well as a spirit world where the dead lived. The main character was a resident of that spirit world. The spirit world was the place where all souls stayed for some time after death. The girl had no intention of reincarnating. She was the first victim in human history, when civilization was just beginning to emerge. But no one knew who she belonged to. Some believed that she belonged to the sky, but the gods did not accept such a sacrifice, and at that time, dragons did not interact much with humans. Therefore, perhaps there was no meaning in the girl's death at all. So she decided not to be reborn in order to become human again. As soon as the girl opened her eyes, she was surrounded by many strange men, and they all thought she was a doll. They all expected her to speak, and when she did, one of them decided that she would be a doll that would never die. Her body was created by magicians who had devoted their entire lives to this task. Since her soul could not be returned, they took the one that was available and placed it in another body. The chief magician decided that now the girl could easily destroy all the dragons around her, but only after the experiment to transfer all her abilities had been successfully completed. Since the girl was not human, she could not feel any pain, but everyone else was simply chained up and tortured. The magician tried to explain that her soul possessed great spiritual power, so even shock was not frightening to her, and her body was no less powerful. It seemed to her that she would now be nothing more than a rat on which experiments would be performed, but she understood that she had no right to refuse. When they saw what was happening to her, they were shocked, because they had not even given her the right to use her abilities. As soon as the magicians turned their heads, they saw that she was standing with huge beasts. The doll was very pleased with her body. Realizing that the girl had gone against them, the magicians decided to kill her immediately, so she decided that she did not need to be reborn. The beauty seemed very calm, and understood that she would have to give orders to her assistants to deal with the magicians in an instant. Several days passed as she sat among the ruins of the tower. Then she realized that destroying was much more enjoyable than building, but she did not know what to do next. There were no options at all. She could calmly go anywhere, but in reality, there was nowhere to go. The girl simply hated human life and wanted very much to return to the spirit world. But in this body, that would be impossible. You can break a doll as much as you want, but it will never die. When she looked up, she saw the Lord of Demons, the Demon King Cardell. She immediately remembered his grandfather, who once boasted about his grandchildren in the spirit world. He was a very strange man who called himself an old grandfather, but in reality, he was just a very young man. Since he did not understand who she really was, the doll told him that she was just a test subject. Then she even wanted to demonstrate all her abilities. They were so powerful that she could not even die. Then the Demon King told her that he had a son and really wanted her to be his butler. Then she heard that the king's son had a strange ability, especially destruction. None of the previous Demon Kings had the power of destruction. Therefore, the king could proudly boast about his child. The man explained that when the child became the Demon King, he would have enough power to grant her death. Then she decided that she would definitely be able to return to her spiritual world, but for now she had to stay with the child until he ascended the throne. She felt that she had been in the spiritual world for quite a long time, so she was not particularly adept at dealing with such documents and did not know or understand what the courtiers did. But he tried to reassure her, saying that she would have assistants to help her with the documents, and her only duties would be to protect the child and maintain discipline in the castle. In fact, she wondered how some little kid could so easily send her to the other world. And yet she decided to accept the offer. They shook hands, which meant they had reached an agreement. Very soon they visited the castle of demons, namely the king's son, Julian. She had to tell a man a little about herself, but he believed that a doll like her could not even have a race. He said he would register her as a doll, but wanted to know at least her name, but it turned out that she did not have one. A lot of time had passed since she lost and then forgot her human name. Then they decided to just go to Julian. As they walked down the corridor, the man talked a lot and told them what they could and couldn't do in the presence of the master. Then he added that all demons went through 3 awakenings. The first one happened when they were little, as they became children. The second awakening was supposed to lead the young man to a more adult age. The third awakening improved all physical abilities. Usually all these stages take place over 100 years, but with strong demons it could take much longer. She immediately began to think about her own life, and especially about death, but the man could not understand what could have made her so cheerful. He also emphasized that she needed to remember the names of the head servant and the head maid of the entire estate. And of course, he emphasized that they must be kept under control, but he was still very disturbed by the doll's facial features. The king's son could only be addressed as young master, because when he first woke up, his mental age was only 5, so it was necessary to be careful. It was this little boy that the doll was supposed to babysit and always be around. When the man approached the boy, he wanted to introduce him to the new butler, namely this girl. She decided to greet him nicely and wanted him to take care of her in the future. Very soon, they were left alone. The girl remembered that she had dealt with children a long time ago, so she understood a little, but it was enough to keep him from crying. As soon as she tried to remove a small leaf from his head, he lunged at her as if possessed and grabbed her hand with his teeth. She grabbed him by his clothes with one hand and held him, but did not understand what he was saying. The little boy was very angry with the girl and wanted her to put him down and never touch him again. He didn't like her touching his hair. As soon as she let him go, the boy fell to the ground, not expecting her to do it so roughly. Then she decided to pick him up again and put him on the floor as he had asked, but he still didn't like it. When she touched his cheeks, she didn't even expect them to be so soft and thought he was very cute. But he didn't like anything she did. He was full of anger. The little dragon was simply overwhelmed with anger and tried with all his might to use his abilities on the girl, but he didn't understand why she wasn't dying. The girl couldn't take it anymore and tried to hug him tightly, feeling very sorry for him at that moment. She began to repeat to him over and over that he was a very good boy, just so that he would calm down. She knew very well that he could tear her head off again, but when she saw his cheeks, she couldn't help but touch them. The girl reminded him again that she had a poor memory and had forgotten that he had asked her not to touch him. As soon as the girl turned her head, she saw a woman running towards them as fast as she could, not knowing that they had a new member of the household. The woman began to emphasize that she was the little master's nanny and knew nothing about who had sent the girl. She even decided that it was an attempt on his life. She thought that the position of nanny was high enough to know in advance about the butler's appointment, so she needed to find a common language with her. The nanny immediately called a bunch of security guards who immediately surrounded the girl, but they didn't yet understand who they were dealing with. Then she suddenly remembered that she had been asked from the very beginning to establish discipline in the estate, but she didn't know if that applied to all these demons. Without wasting a minute, the new nanny immediately used her techniques, and everyone around her quickly fell to the ground and started holding their heads. An assistant immediately ran up to them and begged everyone to calm down, but the girl tried to explain that they had all started it and she had to defend herself. He tried with all his might to explain that this was their new housekeeper, who from that moment on was to manage the people inside the mansion. In those moments, everything became clear to everyone, and she was glad that there was at least someone who could stand up for her. Lialka believed that for some reason all the knights were very weak, while the man was convinced that her strength was incredible and would be enough to destroy a small country on Earth. He really wanted her not to touch all those monster knights because they were a valuable resource. As soon as the woman came to her senses, she immediately wanted to apologize for her initial reaction to the girl and promised that it would never happen again. Her little boy was very interested in the things she had, so he wanted to touch them with at least one finger. Suddenly, the nanny grabbed the doll by the hand and tried to tell her that it was time for her afternoon nap, but the master didn't like that at all and ordered her to let her go. In fact, he was a cute little boy and she couldn't resist touching his soft cheeks. When he got tired of putting up with it, he quickly got rid of both of the girl's hands. The maid almost fainted at the sight. Since she was just a doll, it was no problem to simply put her hands back in place. From the moment she arrived at the estate, she spent all her time with Julian. She even managed to reduce the frequency of his aggressive outbursts. Every time she emphasized that he shouldn't get angry while eating and throw food everywhere. A few minutes later, he was angry again, this time because the girl didn't have a real name. It was very strange to him that the girl had no mother or father, so he decided to give her a name himself. It was very inconvenient to address her without a name. Since he thought her eyes looked like periwinkle, he decided that from then on she would be Peri. Her eyes were green and they really looked like precious stones, but she had never seen her reflection in a mirror. He didn't want to waste any time, so he grabbed her by the hand and wanted her to follow him. The girl was very surprised, because the boy didn't like to be touched. Suddenly he realized that he was holding her hand and immediately became nervous. He led her to his room. Putting a bracelet on her wrist, he pointed to the mirror and wanted her to see her wavy hair and porcelain skin, and her eyes were green which could sparkle in the sun. When she finally saw what she looked like, she didn't understand why the magicians had made her so attractive if they wanted a powerful doll. She did not want to accept such an expensive gift from him, but she could not argue with him, so she simply thanked him. However, the boy did not mind if she gave it to someone else if she did not like it. As soon as he began to get nervous, she tried to calm him down and wanted him to speak normally. He was very curious why she didn't listen to him when he asked her not to touch him, but she found him very cute, so it was difficult for her to control herself. It seemed to her that he was the first cute child she had ever met in her life. He was so handsome that she always wanted to be around him. Julian was sure that everyone would die sooner or later, but Peri insisted that no matter what he did, she would always be with him. But she understood very well that everything would change as soon as he became the Demon King. Julian couldn't help himself and warned her that if she was deceiving him, he would definitely have to kill her someday. Her eyes really lit up, and she didn't mind at all if he killed her himself when the time came for him to take the throne. Every morning, the maid stood at Julian's door to invite him to breakfast, which was specially prepared for demons. As soon as Peri entered and lifted the blanket, she noticed that he was still fast asleep and had no intention of waking up. In one swift movement, she threw him up in the air, which he did not expect, and then caught him in her arms. Julian decided that she was simply insane to do such a thing. While they were sorting things out, the maid brought some water for washing, but Peri decided it was drinking water. She quickly began to wash him, but Julian didn't like it at all. Peri rubbed his face so hard that it turned purple. She thought she had washed him well enough, but he continued to yell at her, saying that he could lose consciousness from the pressure. Their conversation was interrupted again, and the woman insisted that it was time for breakfast and that they needed to get dressed quickly. When Peri wanted to help again, she touched him, but Julian cut her hands off again because he didn't want to be touched. Peri wasn't angry with him at all, but she insisted that he would have to cope with everything himself if she wasn't even allowed to hold his hand. The woman couldn't hold back her emotions and never expected that such a day would ever come, that a young boy could entrust his heart to someone else. He didn't even like the maid touching Peri. He just started to go crazy again. He really didn't like it when demons touched someone else first and then touched him. When he calmed down a little and got changed, he decided to ask Peri how she could die. But she tried with all her might to reassure him that since she was a doll, she was definitely not going to die. Lately, Julian had not been pushing Peri away, but he tried to attack her every time he had the chance. They spent every day together, and she helped him do his hair and get dressed, even though those were the duties of a completely different maid. Thanks to Peri, he always looked incredible, but he didn't want to listen to any of it. Now the maid was very happy that Peri had come to help, even though she had been dissatisfied from the first meeting. When they went out for walks, Peri could take him by the arm and carry him around, but he was very afraid that she might drop him at any moment. The maid couldn't believe what she was seeing because it was unacceptable to carry such a young master in front of everyone. They might laugh at him. Then she picked up one of the demons to demonstrate how to carry the master. The girl immediately obeyed and began to hold him correctly, but she thought it looked rather awkward. There was nothing she could do, because she couldn't walk with the little boy the way Peri had done before, especially in front of all his friends. Then he confessed that he actually had friends, but he didn't like them very much. It wasn't fun to spend time with them at all. But since he always helped them, they started to consider him their friend. When Peri heard all this, she was sure that Julian's friends didn't consider him a friend, but just a useful idiot. To her, he was just a fool who gave everyone else everything he had but never got anything in return. The maid couldn't let the girl say such things in front of the boy, and began to emphasize that he was very smart and that he shouldn't listen to such nonsense. When he ate, she even allowed him to eat with his hands, even though it was not allowed. There were vegetables such as broccoli that he simply could not stand, but Peri still tried to feed them to him, which made him angry. There were moments when she tried to explain very important things to him, and she really didn't want him to grow up to be a real idiot. His intelligence and health would deteriorate significantly if he didn't eat healthy food, but he considered broccoli to be completely unnecessary for him. Julian threw the broccoli on the floor anyway and stood in the way of stupidity. But he quickly recovered and ordered the broccoli to be brought back, but only a little, so he could get used to it. With great effort, he ate it, and now it could be said that Julian had become a wise master that day. And again, she couldn't help but touch him, but this time it was only his head. Meanwhile, the young people wanted to resolve their important issues as soon as possible, and the man decided to write down what needed to be done. At that moment, the girl just stood nearby and tried to read everything the man had written, but at times she closed her eyes so that he wouldn't suspect anything. When the boy didn't know the name of a letter, he always turned to the girls for help, who could help him at any moment. After a while, the woman read what the man had written and shouted loudly that he really wanted to tear off someone's arm or leg, but her colleague was very surprised. Hearing these words, the boy simply confirmed the girl's assumption and was very pleased that she had read his thoughts correctly. When he gave her everything the young man had written to the girl to read, his colleague decided to come up behind him and read it too. But she did so quietly so that no one would hear her. After reading everything that was written there, the woman wanted to tear up the piece of paper, but luckily the beauty quickly stepped aside and did not let her do it. She was convinced that it was wrong to write such bad words, especially at such a young age when the boy did not understand anything. The young man who was watching all this asked them to calm down as quickly as possible because he also didn't like what was happening. There was a lot more written in the note about his friends, and then the girl decided to ask who the boy was talking to at the moment. Then the girl wanted to suggest how to communicate with his peers, and the boy thought carefully about her words, but did not understand everything. The woman standing nearby managed to snatch the piece of paper and immediately began to tell the man that he should not have done that. After that, the girl calmly approached him and decided to help him finish the other part of the essay that was so important to him. But when her friend found out that he had sent the letter after all, she was very shocked because she thought that it was wrong to do so. The girl, on the other hand, had a completely different opinion and was convinced that if the man really wanted to write that, he had every right to do so. The woman still wanted to express her opinion and began to argue with the girl because she was convinced that she was right in this situation. Not hearing any reasonable arguments in response, she realized that she was wrong, but she didn't want to admit it. This small conflict began to irritate the young man very much, and the real magic began to evaporate from him. The girl knew that at any moment the guy could awaken his true abilities, and then it would not be very good for them, so she tried not to talk about it anymore. The guy noted that some people could only discover such talents 100 years ago, and he understood that it would not happen anytime soon. The woman thought that this would not end there, so she asked people to start analyzing what they wrote to others in their letters a little better. Eventually, the girl came to the conclusion that she was just very worried that the Duke's son might kill their boss, but this only made the woman angrier. Because of this, the beauty decided to ask if her interlocutor understood the whole story, but then she replied sincerely that she knew nothing. The woman began to tell everything from the very beginning, namely when magic first appeared and how dark demons influenced this world. It was because magic existed in this world that the Lord sitting behind them was still alive, because otherwise he could have simply died. After analyzing all these events, they realized that the Duke could take advantage of the moment and attack them when they least expected it. After listening to all these events, the man decided to express his opinion, because he thought that he was also an important person who had the right to an opinion. Approaching the child, the girl began to touch his head and emphasized that now she would always be there for him. The man was convinced that he could deal with all the unexpected situations himself, but the girl decided to help him anyway. The boy realized in his little head that he was actually very strong, and that if he wanted to, he could easily tear someone into small pieces. Then the woman wanted to make the guards protect the boy much better, but he categorically refused. The man decided to personally check the letter his son had sent him because he hadn't seen him in a long time. The young men standing nearby calmly watched and told the hero what to do to open the letter. After a while, a person approached them and said that this could be a reason for the Duke to start doing something. Everyone understood perfectly well how dark forces influence this world, so they wanted to quickly make it possible to control all these moments. After he had finished reading the letter, he reported that some workers had declared war on their main competitors. The man standing next to him emphasized that the troops would not move without a good reason, so he wanted to know why such a conflict had started. Before saying this, he wanted to understand where he could get a special poison that could be used to gain the upper hand in this battle. Bowing to the man, he finally understood that he had to go and carry out this difficult task as quickly as possible, and then he began to lead the people. Approaching his boss, he said that if the Duke really managed to take control of the kingdom, it could greatly help him. After a while, the girl herself showed the boy's wish list, and then the women were a little stunned because they did not know how to fulfill it all. One of them was very curious to see how the boy himself would react to all this, and at times she herself was worried because she was a person who loved to panic. In any case, she knew that she would not be able to do all this physically, so she sincerely asked for help from her colleague who could really help with this. After talking to her boss, she started using one spell and even wanted to pick him up. He begged her to just put him down, but she wanted to show him something really weird. The woman started screaming loudly at the heroine because she felt incredibly sorry for the man who had been picked up and shaken violently. In fact, the beauty was doing all this only for the young man because with his help, she could unlock a special magic that could help her in the future. At that moment, the beauty threw the man quite hard and was then completely convinced that the magic would now begin to work on him. The worker turned out to be a very strange person because she constantly argued with the girl and asked her not to touch the guy anymore. She, in turn, decided to offer them to play various games that could distract the young man from this situation. The woman also added that if the man agreed to her request, they would be able to eat some very delicious chocolate. And then they really started playing these games, but at one point the young man got scared because the woman seemed to have turned into a different person. For a long time, they ran after each other, but nothing worked because the guy was simply scared and didn't know what to do in this game. The girl realized her mistake and decided that she needed to change her tactics, so she suggested playing again. It seemed to her that the little children simply did not understand how to play adult games, but this only made the boy very angry. Finally, the woman suggested a very peaceful game that everyone knew how to play, so they decided to play hide and seek. At first, the boy decided to refuse, but then the woman began to persuade him, emphasizing how wonderful the game was. After listening to all her arguments, he finally agreed to play, and then they started thinking about who would be the first to look for someone. At that moment, the man was very unlucky and closed his eyes and started counting to 10, while the girl wanted to hide somewhere. When he counted to 10, he opened his eyes and started looking around to find the girls who were hiding. After the young man found the girl quite quickly, she did not immediately understand how he managed to find her so fast. He searched for the second beauty for quite a long time, but luckily, at that moment, the man noticed something very strange near him, so he decided to look there. As soon as he realized that he had found the girl, he was a little surprised because she did not look very good. The girl, in turn, had read quite a few books on parenting and knew how to behave with small children. Turning to Perry, he wanted to find out why she had been acting so strangely lately, because he was convinced that she had been punished somehow. She asked him not to pay any attention to the books and just relax after a hard day. After putting the child to bed, she decided to ask him if he wanted her to tell him an interesting story. After the lady was about to leave, he asked her to tell him something interesting because he didn't want to fall asleep. But after listening to her for only a few minutes, he simply turned away and decided that he really wanted to sleep and didn't want to listen to anything. She, in turn, was a little surprised by this reaction, but decided to just leave and continue studying various literature. Only later did she notice that the man had woken up and had no desire to go back to sleep, so she tried to persuade him to go back to sleep. The young man had a rather stubborn character, so he was not going to listen to anyone because he wanted to hear a story. Sitting with a book in her hands, she realized that it was actually a good idea to read something about interesting adventures to the boy before bed. As soon as he heard the first lines of the story, he immediately decided to listen to the girl and everything she said. After the story ended, she quickly closed the book and told him that it was time for him to go to sleep. But in reality, the young man was very angry because the story ended quite quickly, and he didn't understand why the girl didn't want to continue reading it to him. But when she started calling him a real child, it made him even more angry. and he asked her never to call him that again. After the girl gently stroked his head, the young man calmed down a little and decided to listen to her because it was indeed still late at night. Meanwhile, another woman stood quietly and looked ahead while the girl used dark magic. As soon as she approached the beauty, she immediately asked what she was doing there, but she herself did not expect to see Perry there. When the woman asked the girl if she had finally read such an interesting novel, her interlocutor did not even know how to respond. Then Perry wanted to know where the woman knew about these books, and she said that she also liked to look at different books in the library and then read them. When the woman wanted to read another interesting novel to the boy, he pointed out that he had already heard this story from the girl. Turning to Perry, she emphasized that the woman should always watch over the boy while he sleeps, rather than reading him strange stories that were harmful to his health. Then she decided to make the boy fly high again, which once more greatly frightened the man who had not expected such behavior from the girl. Turning to the girl, the boy wanted to know what he had to do to finally stop being considered a child. The woman thought long and hard about this question because she understood that the boy was about to become an adult. When she didn't know how to answer the man, she just watched his behavior, but then she suddenly changed. The upset man was very jealous of people who were already adults because he wanted to be on the same level as them and not have to do boring chores. Later, he asked her to read an interesting book to him, but she refused and said she wouldn't do it, so the man wanted to know why. The girl was convinced that the boy was so confident because he really wanted to grow up, but the man denied it. Sitting on a chair, he confessed to her that in reality, all his friends had long since grown up and were adults who could make their own decisions. The girl was a little shocked to hear this and did not know how to explain to him that they were actually his peers. Then she asked the emperor to calm down because there was nothing wrong with him still being a child. After a while, he stopped arguing with her because he realized that, in a way, she was right. But then the young man confessed that all his friends, whom he had known for a long time, had let him down and were no longer friends with him. The beautiful girl thought that there was something else going on as she was convinced that he was sometimes too aggressive, but he denied this. She decided to react calmly and just smiled, although she knew that she was right. Then he wanted to know if the girl had any friends, but it turned out that she also did not like to talk to people for long. Perry said that the man was actually very nice and kind, and she enjoyed talking to him, and then he just looked down and didn't know what to say. Sometime later, when Perry was not around, the man immediately decided to find out what had happened to her, because she was always by his side. The woman emphasized that she would be working with the man today, but he didn't like that news at all, so he abruptly turned away. The girl still wanted to come to some kind of agreement with him and talk, but he responded quite harshly, and then she realized that there was no point in saying anything. After a while, he dared to ask his employee if he really looked nice in her eyes, but she did not expect such a question at all. Hearing these words, the lady immediately began to emphasize that he was indeed a very nice person who looked good. After this conversation, he emphasized that he knew perfectly well that the girl had always told Henry everything, and he didn't like that at all. A second later, using his magic, he was able to make the woman fly up into the air so that she couldn't do anything to him. She tried to persuade the man to stop doing this to her because it was very painful, and the magic had negative consequences for her. As soon as it was over, she immediately grabbed her throat and asked if the emperor had accused the worker of anything else. After that, he began to look out the window and wanted to sincerely understand why everyone told him that he looked very nice, even though he never wanted to appear that way. Finally, the man asked the worker not to tell anyone about their conversation, and the woman agreed. When the girl was immediately asked to come and look after the man, she did not quite understand why she needed to be distracted from her work. As soon as the young man saw everything with his own eyes again, he was immediately very happy to see Perry again, because she was a very important person to him. That day, the girl herself was shocked when she saw such a joyful man who was simply delighted to see her. But she thought that he was just sick, so she really wanted to help him with his injuries right away. When the worker was told that they had a very big problem, he immediately became worried and wanted to know what had happened. Perry decided to calmly explain that the young man was very ill, so she wanted him to help him cope with it somehow. This news greatly alarmed the man, and he quickly began searching for information on how to help the child in such a difficult situation. The man decided to ask the girl if he was a nice child, and only then did she realize that something was seriously wrong. The girl was simply stunned by this news, and then she turned her head and they both saw something not very good. The boy's father was simply shocked by what had happened and waited for someone to explain everything to him. Meanwhile, the girl was busy with the man who had broken into their estate. Therefore, the elder demon realized that all explanations were unnecessary. When the man held the young man who had broken into his estate, he realized that they were all still green. But when poison appeared from his mouth, he realized that they would never find out who was behind this. The Demon King ordered those who survived to be thrown into the dungeon, and all those who had already died to be thrown out of the estate. Now the king's assistant understood that although all the knights were very strong, they were no match for a doll. Suddenly, one of the little ones began to ask Perry for a hug. No one expected this. She tried to explain that her hands were dirty, but he didn't care, because that certainly wouldn't kill him. The little boy held on tightly to Perry and couldn't help but admit that he was very scared that she might die. When the men saw this, they understood that the little boy missed his mother very much and that raising a son on her own was not easy. Julian began to deny that Perry was his mother, and all his father's words were unnecessary at that moment. It was all very strange for her too, but she couldn't do anything about it, nor did she want everyone around her to look at her strangely. When he began to think that she was only his, she wanted him to know that she belonged only to herself. Then the men immediately began to emphasize that they both belonged to the little boy, but the boy didn't care. The assistant asked the girl to agree with the little demon and admit that she really belonged to him, but she didn't want to do that at all. The father was actually a little tired of the whole situation and wanted the boy to calm down and start behaving appropriately. But the boy was convinced that his father had no right to decide for him who he should belong to. They simply couldn't believe their eyes when the little boy actually started smiling for the first time in such a long time, so they decided to record this important date. Perry felt that she should tell the boy right away that she definitely didn't belong to him, so that there wouldn't be any problems in the future. A little later, she and her assistant went to the dungeon to interrogate all the criminals who had broken into their estate. She understood very well that all the killers had come for Julian, because few people knew her personally. Perry understood that they had tried to kill her so as not to leave any witnesses, but one enemy's expression was very interesting. All the criminals were chained so that they could not even move. The smell in the room was simply terrible. It was the smell of flesh that had already begun to rot. When she looked at them, she was surprised that all the men were still alive, but there were some who had not even begun to be tortured to confess who had ordered the crime. The assistant said that only a few of them had revealed that they had come only for Julian, but they did not confess who had ordered the crime. Then it was Perry's turn to be tortured. She said that from the moment of death, her soul had begun to separate from her body, but she did not know what would happen to beings who died with a sense of guilt. As soon as the girl used her abilities, they all began to beg for mercy and salvation. But she immediately warned them that they would not be able to die that day, because she would make them all pay for attacking the young boy. When he opened his eyes, he realized that the doll had not been there the whole time. She told him that she had spent a lot of time in a dungeon punishing the criminals. The maid was very frightened when she realized that the girl had been forced to kill someone, because there was a strong smell of blood in the room. She had to send the boy to breakfast alone and tidy herself up, but Julian was against it and wanted to wait for her. As soon as she was ready, she immediately thought that knowing the boy's character, she would not be surprised if he was still waiting for her there. Lately, they had not been apart for even an hour. The girl understood that she couldn't get close to Julian because she would go to the spirit world when he grew up. Suddenly, a young man who had wanted to meet her for a long time approached her. He wanted to pull her close to him and even admitted that he knew her name well, but Perry didn't like the situation very much. She considered herself the butler of the Demon King, and no one could use their power on her like that. But the young man didn't understand her behavior. He was surprised that she couldn't feel his heart beating or anything else interesting. Then he decided that Perry liked girls. Then a strange girl appeared who also began to court her, and then Perry decided to deal with both of them and explain everything to them forcefully. After dealing with one of them, an assistant arrived and showed her all the evidence they had gathered from their captives. All three said the same thing. They were the main servants at the estate, whom Perry's assistant had told her about from the beginning. She was very surprised because she had never seen them before. Their main task was to deal with anyone who tried to invade the estate. Leon tried to explain that he had been doing all his duties very well, but he had not had time to deal with the last problem. The letter was about the demonic Duke Zerk, to whom Julian had previously written a threatening letter. Now it was clear that it was Lef's father who had targeted Julian to protect his son. At that time, he had no time to deal with children's problems, as the inhabitants of their territories were dying out. Perry was very surprised that everything could have turned out this way because of a letter. It was very strange. It seemed more like the Duke was trying to scare Julian because he couldn't kill him. It seemed to her that the criminals simply didn't have the courage to challenge him directly, so they resorted to such cowardly acts. Therefore, the Demon King's assistant decided that from that moment on, these two would be responsible for protecting the young master. As soon as Julian saw the chief servants, he was very unhappy with their presence, but from that moment on, they had to stay by his side. Anger overwhelmed the boy, and he ordered them to disappear from his sight immediately. Now that some issues had been resolved, the doll wanted to feed her little boy. Later, Perry revealed that the assassins had been sent by Duke Lef and emphasized that they now had to take appropriate retaliatory measures. While she was reading the letter, the servants thought that it should not be sent, because then everyone would find out that there had been an attempt on Julian's life. Perry understood that all demons went through 3 awakenings. All demon children had to go through the first awakening to release their demonic energy. After the second awakening, they could use their magic, and the third made them a full-fledged demon. The stronger the demon, the faster its demonic energy was generated. The maid also decided to help and go with them to send the letter to the Duke, but everyone understood that the letter was just a pretext. Perry really didn't want to take the nanny with her, so she ordered her to stay put and tell Henry everything. She was very worried about the boy and wanted to do everything in her power to prevent another attack on him. The Duke had to be made to understand that even without protection, his next attack on Julian would end in his death. The girl begged him not to use his demonic energy without her permission, even if it seemed that death was near. He was very worried that they would die, but the doll assured him that she could be trusted and relied upon. The man was already very frightened that the girls had been gone for so long, as he had been waiting for them for quite some time. Now the young master had to be taken to Duke Lef. In fact, the man was pleased and had also been warned that he would have visitors, but he was very curious to know the purpose of their visit. After the man's words, the boy was on the verge of breaking down, but the girl kept reminding him of what she had asked him before they came there. Perry said that she was not a nanny, but Julian's butler, but this surprised the Duke, as the boy had not passed the second awakening. He wanted to get straight to the point and understand what terrible thing had happened that was described in the letter. Perry explained that there had been an attempt on her master's life, and that the perpetrator had not been found. That was why they had come there to ask an old friend for help. But the man was sure that this was not possible, as the boy had once threatened to tear off his limbs. Perry understood that the Duke was very angry with Julian and was ready to bring him a gift as an apology. He immediately stated that if he did not like it, she would have to prepare something a little better. The girl happily reported that the box contained some of the gifts they had received in recent days, but most of them had already been used, and she really wanted the Duke to accept them. As soon as he realized what the gifts were, he immediately ordered his guards to seize all his guests. Perry understood that now the fun was about to begin and gave the boy a magic potion to drink. Now the doll and Julian were ready to be killed as many times as necessary, but nothing could threaten them anymore. Earlier, when the girl was in the king's assistant's room, she found a potion used by higher demons to gain extraordinary strength. After the boy used the potion, all those who attacked him immediately died. When the headmaid saw all this, she couldn't believe that the boy could handle it all on his own. The Duke himself was scared to death at that moment and didn't know what to do, but Julian decided that they would take his friend with them to the estate. When they all returned home together, they were very sorry that the father of the young man they had taken with them was not there. The headmaid was only worried about herself and was glad that they had survived. When they paid attention to the young man, they noticed that something was a little wrong with him, but the maid said that she had slightly knocked him unconscious. As soon as the assistant saw what they had brought back, he was very frightened, especially for little Julian, but he was completely fine. The boy was sitting in Perry's arms as usual and was only slightly covered in dirt. The man tried with all his might to shout and call for a doctor when he saw the blood on the boy's face, but it was the blood of those he had killed. Then she decided to confess that the potion she had stolen was very important to them all. He tried with all his might to explain that the potion could have side effects, and that instead of demonic power, only the power of absorption could remain. Therefore, it was very dangerous for the child. The man was categorically against the boy taking and constantly drinking everything. But the boy trusted Perry, and if she gave him something from her own hands, he considered it completely safe. They decided to lock their prey in a dungeon and then decide what to do with him later. The assistant himself was ready to face the consequences that awaited him. He tried to pull himself together and calm down, as well as begin to resolve the issues that concerned all the adults. But everything went completely according to plan. Julian felt very ill, his eyes closed, and he lost consciousness. They were all surrounded by pink flames and did not understand what was happening, but the girl begged everyone to hold on to her with all their might. Very soon they found themselves near the Lake of Awakening. As soon as the boy began to sink under the water, it was clear that the second stage of awakening had begun. It was already the second week of Julian's awakening, but Perry simply could not find her place, even though she understood that all demons went through this. The nanny reported that all demons with the power of absorption entered the blue lake, and demons with the power of destruction went to the black one. Julian simply entered the lake with the aim of awakening, like all the demons. But at that moment, Perry thought she had made many mistakes in relation to him. The nanny suggested that they sit down and have a snack, but the girl immediately remembered how she had once tried to force Julian to eat broccoli, and now began to feel guilty. Of course, she was sure that vegetables were good for his health and that he would need to eat them even after awakening. She thought he was really good for trying to listen to her, so every time Perry asked the pastry chef to make his favorite dessert. Then he decided to suggest that they eat all the delicious dishes together. Now, standing in front of the lake, she realized that when Julian woke up, he would no longer be a child, and everything indicated that he would definitely forget her. They were both very curious to see how big he would grow, but if you measured by adult age, he would definitely be 23. She heard the maid say that all the memories were supposed to remain with the boy, but she was still worried. While they waited, they decided to read some of the books Leia had brought. Then he decided to tell her that he had been forbidden to enter the underground prison because he had been trying to draw energy from Lifa from time to time. Perry didn't want to listen to him and was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The man noticed that she was only kind to Julian. The man emphasized that Julian was not dying at all and that she could relax. Everyone was going through an awakening, and since his power was greater, the process was taking a little longer. She wasn't depressed. She was just anxious that something could go wrong, and she was especially worried that he would stop hugging her. The knights quickly got ready, and since the boy was in the lake, it was their only chance to get rid of him for good. But at that moment, Perry appeared before them, wanting to quickly fix the situation. She wanted to know what their plan was. The leader of the knights did not want to listen to her and ordered his men to seize her immediately. But they did not yet know who they were really dealing with and that she would not allow anyone to insult her master. As soon as the demon saw that all his knights were in a bad state, he did not understand what had happened. He was furious when he heard that an entire army couldn't handle one little boy, and that an unarmed girl had defeated an entire army. On top of that, the knight handed over the ring that Perry had given him for the demon. He understood that only Henry was in the Demon King's mansion, but he used magic and was always with the king. If the butler was with Julian in the castle, then it could have been Cardell. The Duke decided that he needed information about the butler immediately. He wanted to know her age and where she came from, and he also decided to lure the powerful demon to his side. The knight who had seen her explained that she was a girl with white hair and green eyes, and that her name was Perry. She was surrounded by countless blue lights. But no one felt any demonic energy from her, so it couldn't be said that she was a demon. However, he understood that a simple human couldn't be that strong, so he decided that she was a dragon after all. Since ancient times, demons and dragons had not been on very good terms, but if Cardell, who loved his son Julian very much, bent his will, he could easily lure the dragon to his side. The Duke ordered invitations to be sent to all the demon dukes to find out everything about the girl. He also remembered that demons and dragons had once signed an agreement not to enter each other's lands, and since one had entered their territory, he decided that this could help overthrow the Demon King. Perry said that there had been an attack the previous night, and the knights had tried to get rid of a young boy. He was sure that they were all in a hurry because Perry had awakened Julian. He also added that no one should touch him while he was in the Lake of Awakening. Then she asked him to tell everyone not to go there yet because they could die. She held back and revealed that she was actually a doll created by human magicians. But she realized that this information was very difficult for him to comprehend, so she decided to shake him up a little. He tried to say something, but he couldn't because her hands were squeezing his throat. Suddenly, a young man appeared, with eyes the color of the setting sun, horns that grew to the size of his palms, and a height that was a head taller than everyone else. Before them stood a fully grown Julian. He immediately rushed to Perry and hugged her tightly, and she was very happy about his new awakening. As soon as they turned their heads to the side, they saw that there was someone else next to them. These were the intruders Perry had been trying to deal with, and her fire kept them under control. Now Julian was so powerful that he was ready to crush them in an instant without even thinking twice. The next Demon King finally completed his awakening and was ready to announce it to everyone. Some men decided to go to the girl and tell her what she needed to do at that moment, while the young man tried to stay a little behind. But as it turned out, the young man had emphasized to the man that he should leave, not the girl. But his companion did not expect this at all. He began to shout loudly, but he had no choice but to obey his commander, because he could simply lose his job. After a while, she decided to turn to the young man and ask him why he had treated the worker so harshly. But he did not understand what the girl was talking about. She believed that she was actually much stronger than this worker and could have known how to help him do such easy tasks. When she spoke to Perry, he emphasized that he paid them good money to do their jobs well, so he wanted the workers to listen to him. The woman was shocked to hear this, but she didn't want to argue with the man because she knew how it could end. Approaching her husband, she emphasized that he couldn't be so obsessed with money and the power he had, but he wasn't going to listen to her. She understood that if you looked at him from childhood, his character had hardly changed and remained the same as it had been in the beginning. After that, she wanted to approach him, touched his face, and emphasized that he should never do that when he found his queen. The girl believed that the guy simply did not understand that in the future, he would meet the love of his life and would treat her differently. Then he decided to talk to the girl and emphasize that she was the only one he needed in this life because he was incredibly happy when she was with him. He recalled the times when she was the only woman who could approach him normally and bring out the best qualities in him, which he liked. Then he emphasized that he really wanted to love Perry with all his heart, but she, in turn, did not know how to respond. When he met his father again, he decided to ask him personally what love really was and whether he had ever truly loved someone. The man was surprised by this question and did not even know how to answer it, but decided to respond calmly. At first, the young man wanted to know how love differed from liking someone, but his father was unable to answer this question right away. A worker who had been working for them for quite a long time decided to join the conversation and help the young man regulate his emotions. The father agreed with the worker that his son needed to learn to react calmly to stressful situations, as this would help him greatly in life. The man thought that outwardly his child had grown up a lot, but inside, he was still the same little uneducated person who knew nothing. His son still did not understand why his father could not give him a normal, reasoned answer, but constantly spoke to him in riddles. The girl, in turn, just stayed in her room and was a little worried because she didn't know what they were talking about with the emperor. Then the father pointed out that his son was constantly looking at him very harshly, but the young man told him not to change the subject under any circumstances. The man still wanted to hear the answer to his question, which his father kept putting off, and then the man wanted to know if the boy had not been told enough. After a while, he took out his documents and began to tell the boy everything as it really was, and he in turn tried to listen to his father very carefully. At that time, the man did not know whether he could trust him completely, because his relative usually liked to lie a little. When the conversation turned to other workers, the father wanted to know why his son treated some of them so cruelly. The worker standing nearby watched closely, because he understood that in the future the man would want to do something again, so he had to keep an eye on him. Ignoring him, he clearly stated that Perry would now be his forever, because the man simply could not live without her. The people who were watching him closely were a little shocked, but understood that they simply did not have the strength to argue with him. The woman was still standing behind the door and did not know how to react, so she decided to listen quietly and form her own opinion. As soon as the man left his father's office, he immediately noticed the girl, and then she realized that they needed to have a serious talk. At first, she wanted to know if the young man had finished his conversation with his father about the trip he wanted to take so soon. She also wanted to know who would be going with him on this trip, because she knew that his father would never let him go so far away on his own. He was surprised to hear this, but decided not to give her an honest answer at that moment, because he didn't know who he was going with himself. The girl offered her help in this situation and wanted to simply go to her husband and find out for herself who the young man could go with. As soon as the worker saw the girl again, he immediately decided that he needed to talk to her because she also played an important role here. At first, he decided to tell her everything that had just happened in the palace, and the girl tried to understand as best she could. As soon as he had relayed all the words the emperor had told him to say, everyone was quite surprised, and at first the girl decided to pay attention to the man's reaction. Realizing that he had no business being there, he simply bowed and decided to go to his chief executive. Left alone, the girl asked the man when he was supposed to leave on his journey, as time was quickly passing. Unfortunately, the young man did not know the exact answer at that moment, but he was convinced that it would happen in the coming days. The beauty was glad to hear such news and suggested that the man first warn everyone that the young man was leaving on a long journey. But the man immediately refused, not wanting to give a reason, so he decided to ask the girl why she wanted to warn everyone so quickly. Taking him by the shoulders, the girl asked the young man to show at least a little respect for the other demons who also wanted to know all the information about him, because they were a little worried. He then suggested that the girl follow him, but she was a little scared and didn't know why she should go to another place. As soon as they found themselves in a deserted city, the man asked the girl what she loved most, jewelry or expensive clothes. She didn't know what all these questions were about. Realizing that she had no choice but to tell him everything, the girl decided to confess to the man what she really loved to do. She also emphasized that she did not need expensive gifts at all because she saw no value in them. After he asked her to leave the room, the beauty said that she didn't want to go anywhere because she was already with her husband. He decided not to believe some of the things she said, but she insisted that she had never lied to him. After that, the young man wanted the beauty to promise him that she would never lie to him, and then he held out his little finger to shake hands with her. Meanwhile, the men discussed how strange the demons had become in this world, and that they needed to think of something. The worker who had recently come to the man began to panic, but he decided that he needed to think everything through carefully. After hearing all these stories, the man did not understand many of the details, but he knew for sure that everyone had a lot of work to do right away. He was also convinced that his team was doing a great job, so he didn't see any reason to worry. The worker was shocked to hear this, so he decided to ask the emperor if everything was okay. When they began to discuss his son's relationship with Perry, the worker thought that the young man was incredibly serious about it. After they had discussed everything, the man wanted his interlocutor to think carefully about the situation, because it was quite important. The father was convinced that there was no need to worry about it at that moment, because his son was growing up and it was completely normal. Finally, the worker just wanted to ask if it was necessary to protect the boss's son, because he thought that he was in danger at times. Julian's father was convinced that the man was actually able to control his emotions and could have resolved the situation at any moment. When the interlocutor began to ask a few more questions, the man wanted the young man to calm down a little because he could see how much he was worried about it. Meanwhile, the man was still with the girl and wanted to discuss something with her, but Perry began to dislike these conversations. After a while, the man wanted to hear from the girl that she would never betray him and would always be by his side. She was very shocked to hear this from her boyfriend and did not know how to respond because she did not want to hurt him. But he continued to look into her eyes. When she lowered her head, she said that she did not want to do it. Hearing this, the man smiled because finally, for once, the girl had refused him something, Over time, he began to feel that dark magic was really affecting his body because at times, he became more and more aggressive towards his surroundings. The girl did not know how she should swear to the workers because she understood that it was quite important to her husband. Then he emphasized that he didn't really need anything, and as soon as the girl heard this, she immediately exhaled because all her problems seemed to have simply disappeared. After a while, the woman looked to see how much money the young man had because she wanted him to have enough for all his upcoming trips. But he was convinced that at that moment, the trip was not the most important thing, but the girl continued to do her job well. At that moment, the young man decided to just sit down and watch the girl closely, but she found it very unpleasant because she was not used to anyone watching her. After they had gathered all their belongings, the man decided that he simply had to leave this area because he wanted to get away as soon as possible. Before that, he wanted to see his old friend, who had asked him to help him out as soon as possible. Looking at this person, he understood that he had only one title left, so the young man was 100% sure that he was much stronger. Leaning toward his interlocutor, he emphasized that if he looked at the girl again, the man would simply gouge his eyes out. But that was all, because the man repeated this several times so that the young man would understand who he was dealing with. Looking at Julian, he understood what a cruel person he was, and then he accidentally looked at the girl, and a second later, the man simply cut his stomach open. The woman was very surprised by what she saw with her own eyes, but decided not to say anything to her husband. When they talked to the man a little better, Julian emphasized that he simply knew that the man just wanted some kind of benefit from him. The father, in turn, simply pondered these events and did not know what decision to make at that moment. The workers who were standing behind him decided to agree with everything, although one of them understood that this was very unwise. The man understood that in the future he might have more competitors because he saw how quickly the world was developing, so he wanted to defeat everyone as quickly as possible. When they noticed that the man wanted to open a bottle of expensive wine, they immediately decided to emphasize that this drink was not as sweet as the man imagined. He, in turn, decided not to listen and said that he really liked how the workers got along with each other because he used to be very close friends with the Duke. Hearing this, they were quite surprised, but understood that they couldn't take this man's word for it. When the young man began to pour himself some expensive wine, he wanted to ask the workers how many years had passed since the Duke had returned to this area. They did not know the answer to this question, so one of them decided to apologize immediately, as he was not used to letting his boss down. After a while, he heard his new assignment, which was to keep Julian in one place for as long as possible because it was quite important. He decided to give the other worker an even more difficult task. He had to spread false rumors, but the man did not understand what exactly he was supposed to spread. They understood that if they started doing such things, the Duke would definitely come here with his son, and then there would be a big conflict. At that moment, there were many different thoughts in his head that he had to completely remove from his mind and do what his boss asked him to do. The next day, the girl decided to knock politely on the door and ask if the man was in his room. Then he met the girl and wanted to ask why she had come to him so early, since she usually slept late. Upon entering his room, the lady saw how messy it was because the maid was just holding his clothes and wanted to help him somehow. Perry didn't like this very much because she knew that these were expensive things that had to be handled with great care so as not to stain them. Then the man decided to ask the girl if she could help him wash his face, and the woman was surprised by such a request. He was very ashamed to admit it, but in fact, the man did not yet have the skills to wash his face properly on his own, even though he already possessed magic. Previously, it was very painful for him when Perry washed his face, but with age, this pain gradually began to leave the man. The girl looked at him for a long time because she began to understand that the man had recently started behaving completely differently. She quickly took her handkerchief and emphasized that no one else would do this anymore, because the man was already a grown man. After this procedure, he asked the woman to bring him breakfast personally, but she wanted them to go downstairs and have breakfast together. As it turned out, the man did not want to go there because he knew that there were a lot of people there, and he simply felt uncomfortable there. Then the chief emperor decided to go down to the guests and emphasize that today they could eat and drink whatever they wanted because his son Julian had shown real abilities. Everyone who saw this with their own eyes was very surprised, especially the girl who did not expect to hear such words from a man at all. After a while, her colleague decided to approach Perry personally and emphasize how delicious the food was today. Later, Julian approached her again, surprised that so many people had come to celebrate his awakening. When the girl finally decided to try a small piece of the food, she realized that the chef had done an excellent job and she liked it very much. As soon as she noticed that the man was drinking wine quite quickly, the lady immediately asked him to slow down a little because he could easily get drunk in a few minutes. Later, one of the employees approached them and said that it was necessary to drink alcohol constantly because that was what people loved him for, as it had such an effect. The girl did not like this company at all, so she decided to move away a little because she understood that she did not want to be around such people. Then another employee came up to her and insisted that if she stayed, he would really appreciate it if she looked after Julian. She agreed, but she understood that at that moment she was surrounded by many unpleasant people who constantly wanted to hear something from her. The girl tried her best to restrain herself from drinking alcohol, but at one point she simply couldn't hold back and started drinking it straight from the barrel. After a while, they decided to go out onto the balcony, and then the man asked if everything was okay with the girl, but she asked the young man the same question. He emphasized that everything was fine with him, but he was worried about the girl, and her words hurt him deeply. Then he decided to get closer to the girl and emphasized that he would always help her, no matter how bad the situation she found herself in. The girl was convinced that the man was actually a little drunk, although he immediately denied all her assumptions, and then she seemed to believe him. On the same day, the young man began to tell her stories about his father, who always emphasized that his son was completely obsessed with the girl. She usually never believed such stories, but this time she really understood that the man was telling her the truth. Julian wanted to resolve his issues with his father as soon as possible, but his father simply refused. Then the son added that he could do everything as required tomorrow, but his father wanted him to wait for his gift first and then make any conclusions. The young man in turn began to refuse, but his father insisted that his son accept the gift. After a few minutes, he finally agreed, and then his father emphasized that this time it would be a gift that the man never expected to see. But before they could finish their conversation, they were interrupted by another character who also wanted to add something. He approached the manager and said that the gift had actually arrived a long time ago, and then the demon asked the man to bring it now. Julian didn't like this very much because he understood that something was wrong, so he tried to watch everything carefully so that nothing would happen without him. Then the man looked intently into the woman's eyes and wanted to understand what she was thinking, but Perry just looked away from him. The father also emphasized that if anyone didn't like something, they could easily take the place of the demon king and decide difficult issues themselves, but no one said anything in response. The girl decided to just bow quietly and agree with everything because she had no desire to argue with such people. After a while, they decided to go to a secluded place with her husband to discuss their issues. On the way, she wanted to ask the young man what the gift was for and whether he was alive, but unfortunately, he could not say anything. When he turned his head away, he noticed that the girl had started touching a man's head and pulling his hair. As soon as she let him go, the young man decided to approach the hero and ask how he felt after what had been done to him. After such an act, he wanted to know what had caused such bad treatment towards him, because the man believed that he had done nothing to anyone. Hearing these words, the girl decided to apologize to him, but the young man still understood that now he needed to be much more careful around such people. After a while, the man said that the boss had been waiting for them for a long time and wanted to show them something important. But after such an attack, the young man was simply afraid to stand up because he understood that he could be beaten so badly again. The girl understood that this person could easily make the demon's energy flow to him, so she also tried to be vigilant towards this man. Later, Juliana said that a very important person had arrived, but he did not know what it was about, so he wanted to find out from his father. A second later, the same person appeared in their palace, and then the man did not understand at all why he had been brought to this place, and as it turned out, it was indeed a gift from his father. Then the man began to ask for his son to be returned to him quickly, but as it turned out, no one was going to do that day. A second later, a worker approached him, pointed a knife directly at his face, and emphasized that he was now standing in front of the boss, so he had to speak nicely to him. Julian looked at this man for a long time, but still could not understand why his father had given him such a gift. But after a while, he began to guess. A second later, the man's dark forces began to strongly influence their guest, and then the young man simply could not control what was happening to him. Approaching the men, Perry emphasized that she really didn't like how they were treating the guest who had recently been with them. The worker decided to quickly put him on his stomach and ask him never to activate such magic again, as it gave Julian strong competition. After a while, the man decided to approach the girl and find out how she was feeling at that moment, but she did not know how to respond. Eventually, the man began to feel very confident and then suggested that the young man go into the room where his son was. The father liked how his son was behaving towards the stranger, so he asked them to leave his room quickly and go about their business. The young man liked this idea very much, but in reality he did not yet understand whether he had behaved well or badly towards that man. The boy's father, in turn, did not pay any attention to this, because he thought that he was already much older than a couple of months ago, so he was sure that his son would be able to do the right thing. As soon as they entered the secret room, they were met by a girl who was watching over a man sitting in handcuffs. Before that, Julian drank a special potion and then asked everyone who was watching over the man to leave and rest. The girls, who were doing their job well, were only too happy to hear these words, so they quickly went to another place. As soon as the young man saw his son, he immediately began to run towards him because he noticed that he was in very poor physical condition. After that, he wanted to ask Julian what his loved one was accused of and why someone would do such a thing to a man. Then he leaned closer to his interlocutor and said that in fact, his son had initially wanted to kill Julian, but he simply had not succeeded. The father began to justify his loved one, but in reality, the man was not going to listen to any of it because he knew the truth. The girl looked at these people for a long time and understood that they really loved each other very much, but she also knew how cruel they were. Julian, however, had no intention of showing mercy, so he began to use his magic against the men, and it worked. When they started to argue with him, the man decided to take a sharp weapon and threaten them as best he could. The girl was surprised to see all this, but she understood that the potion the man had recently drunk would soon take effect. When one of the young men simply lay down and could no longer do anything, the girl wanted to ask if Julian wanted to take Lef's energy. She continued to watch calmly and was very curious to see how it would all end. Coming up to the girl, the man began to emphasize that he liked her very much and wanted Perry to always be with him. When he heard that the two men who were still handcuffed were starting to talk, Julian turned his attention to them. The Emperor, in turn, performed his tasks very well, so after a while he decided to take a break and watch his workers. As soon as the hero came to him, he immediately told him that he really liked his gift, which pleased his father. Julian wanted to know from his father what he should do with these people, but he immediately heard the answer that the man should suck all his energy out. After that, they decided to discuss the events that were to unfold. But in reality, the young man had not yet planned his future, as he had not yet decided on his current affairs. The father was pleased that his son was so sensible about such important matters. But at that moment, another character approached them. Without thinking twice, the manager of the establishment immediately decided to give the worker a new task that he had to complete by evening. When his child started talking again about wanting to go on a long journey, the man reacted quite sharply. At first, he wanted to know why his son wanted to leave home so badly, but as it turned out, the man just wanted to take a break from his daily chores. As they continued to stand at the door and wait to be let in, the man began to get a little nervous, but the girl calmed him down. He had no idea where Leon was, who was supposed to help them with their clothes a long time ago, but after a while, everything changed. Meanwhile, the girl recalled the events that had happened to them not so long ago in their native palace. The girl was convinced that during their travels with the man, they would meet many interesting people. The worker finally agreed, but asked the girl to be very careful because there were many bad people in those parts. Then he gave her a magical substance which, as it turned out, would allow her to call for help at any time from the castle where they were staying. The girl reminded him that this was not necessary because she possessed great power, but the worker insisted that it was better to be safe than sorry. When they finally saw a man who decided to approach them to help, the young man was no longer in such a positive mood. The beauty decided to talk to him first and then pointed out that he should have noticed what time it was, as he was quite late. After the girl started talking to him, she asked what Henry had told the man, and it turned out that now everyone knew that they had to hurry. But after a while, they had to leave, so the girl began to say goodbye to the people she had met there, while Julian was already sitting on his horse. That day, the man behaved very differently because he had a confident look that suited him very well. When the man noticed that the girl had simply turned around and did not even want to get on the horse, he asked her why she had made such a decision. Looking at the animal, she began to worry a little because Perry didn't ride horses very often and didn't know if she would be able to do it again this time. After a while, the man decided to approach the girl and ask if she wanted to ride a horse. Julian decided to give the girl some advice and emphasized that such a horse could easily carry more people than she could imagine. A second later, a completely different animal appeared next to her, which looked very much like a wolf but was blue in color, and she decided that she would ride it. As soon as the man saw this with his own eyes, he immediately began to worry because he understood that this was not an animal, but a real monster that could simply kill them. Julian also did not want to take such an animal with him, so he simply suggested that the girl sit down next to him and calmly ride forward with him. After the man realized that the girl was holding on to him very weakly, he asked her to hold on tightly because she could easily fall off. The man sitting behind them watched them closely because he was helping to navigate the route and tell them how to drive. Eventually, Julian began to dislike this very much because he never liked people who constantly bossed him around and told him what to do. A second later, the girl noticed that they were just standing in one place, and she wanted to know why. After regaining their strength, they continued on their way, and the man who was always with them pointed out that they could make it to the festival in time. The man thought that a big holiday was coming soon because it was the season for a flower that was quite beautiful, and everyone wanted to see it. As soon as they arrived at the festival, they immediately noticed quite a few unfamiliar people talking to each other and looking happy. Now it was clear to everyone why Leon had wanted to come to this place so badly from the very beginning, because he was one of the happiest people at the festival. After a while, he asked to step away from the girl and the man because he wanted to walk around a little, but she wouldn't let him. Hearing this, he was quite upset, but then the girl wanted to talk to Julian privately about the matter. But the man in turn asked the girl and her partner to just stand there and wait while he bought them some food. Understanding the situation, she told the man that he should watch the boy and she would do the task. After she saw the huge queue with her own eyes, she realized that she would have to wait quite a long time to get anything. But before she could calmly pick up her order, one of her acquaintances started calling her and wanted to say something. When the stranger noticed that the girl was alone in this area, he immediately offered her to keep him company, as he was there by himself. She began to refuse his advances, but the man turned out to be very rude, so he started touching her hands. Then she clearly stated that she just wanted to buy food for her boss, but this only made the man more interested. Noticing this disgusting situation, Julian decided to quickly intervene and talk to the man personally, telling him to never approach the girl again. Later, the beauty saw that Leon was just lying there and could hardly move, and she became very frightened for him and wanted to know what had happened to him. But first, he wanted to resolve the situation with the girl because he could see that this man was quite an insolent person who simply did not want to let her go. Realizing that he was talking to a serious person, the young man began to behave differently and then asked whose son he was. She had no intention of listening to all that disgusting talk, so she decided to hit the man once so that he would never approach her again and leave the young man alone. All the people standing around them began to pay attention to the young couple because they noticed that they were truly unusual people and very different from everyone else. After receiving their long-awaited food, they decided to sit down at the table and just talk quietly about the events that had taken place in their lives, while Leon wanted to regain his strength. After they began to feel better, Julian emphasized to Leon that they needed to find out which family the man who had approached them belonged to. When everyone had eaten their fill, they began to think about how to find accommodation in this city because they needed somewhere to spend the night. The girl apologized because she didn't need to sleep at all. Hearing this, the men were very surprised but didn't know what to say to the beauty. After that, Leon decided to leave them and go about his business, while the man and woman stayed behind to enjoy their meal. After a while, the girl realized that all these possessions actually belonged to special demons who had a strong influence on this area with their magic. Later, the conversation turned to flowers, and the man did not know what to say because he was not knowledgeable on the subject, so he decided to just remain silent. When she turned her head to the other side, she noticed that the man had bought her a special dish, which was actually very tasty. With a sad face, the girl said that it was very tasty, although she didn't really want to try anything new. The man took it calmly, but after a while he realized that something was hurting him sharply. As soon as she saw this with her own eyes, she immediately decided to go up to the man and ask how he was doing, because she could see that something was wrong. After she heard some incomprehensible words, the girl asked Julian to tell her again what had happened to him, but he just started to get up. Finding out that the guy actually just had a bad headache, she decided to give him some special medicine that could help. As soon as someone called the girl, the man immediately grabbed her by the arm and asked her not to leave him under any circumstances. It turned out that he was a character who wanted to tell his companions that he had actually found a very nice place to rest. After he really felt very unwell, the girl concluded that perhaps the problem was in the food or water the man had been drinking. The man immediately concluded that, in fact, the drink that the manager had recently drunk while sitting at the table could have had such an effect. He began to talk enthusiastically about how such a drink could have a very negative effect on people, but at times also a positive one, as it gave a feeling of love. The girl was surprised to hear this and wanted to punish the man for his bad behavior towards her boss. Realizing that there was no other way out but to let the man rest, the girl asked Leon where he had found the apartment. When she got home, the lady immediately put her husband on the bed and asked him to fall asleep quickly so that his body could rest. As soon as she was about to leave Julian, he suddenly got up and asked if she would always be with him. A second later, she wasn't afraid and approached her husband, hugging him tightly, and then he felt real warmth. But despite all this, he still bowed his head and began to think about something, because he understood that the girl still wanted to leave him. Then she also did not know what to say to her husband because it was very difficult for her to analyze all this, so she decided to just remain silent. Meanwhile, in another place, the men were discussing the case in which Leon had not shown himself in the best light. The boy's father immediately noticed that as soon as Perry reappeared in their lives, the boy became much calmer. The worker who was always standing nearby simply agreed with his boss because he didn't want to contradict him in any way. The boss was pleased that his opinion was being listened to, so he decided to continue reading the letter, which he liked very much. Lighting a cigarette, he continued reading this flawless letter and realized that the person who wrote it was truly very intelligent. After he finished reading it, he immediately gave the worker the task of finding the person who wrote it, and then the man realized that it would not be an easy task. Later, after reading this beautiful story, the man did not even know when such letters began to play such an important role in his life.